This segment on Dr. Anna Lukens is from the podcast All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories number 65, Fathers and Mothers of American Medicine, Part 4, recorded for August 2024. You can listen to the rest of this podcast or 100 others just like it for free from wherever you get your podcasts. Anna Lukens, M.D., 1844-1917. It's always a great joy when I find that someone has essentially written a script for me. I had decided to include woman medical pioneer Anna Lukens in this podcast, and I looked around for information. One of our guides, Patricia Rose, covered Anna in her LGBTQ plus tour in June, and the story kind of sparked my interest. So, lo and behold, she's got a Wikipedia entry. When attending clinics in the Pennsylvania hospital in November 1869, the first time women students attended the hospital, she and Anna Broomall led a line of women students out of the hospital grounds amid hisses, jeers, insults, and thrown stones and mud from male students. End quote. Okay, you got my attention. I looked up Anna Broomall. She also has a Wikipedia entry. Her family is the namesake for Broomall, Pennsylvania. Broomall and 8 other medical students were the first women to attend lectures at the Pennsylvania hospital. Male medical students jeered, catcalled, threw spitballs, and even chased the women from the building during their first visit. Quote, it doesn't sound like the first account. There's fewer women, and it didn't say in the first place that they were chased out of the building. What about the Wikipedia entry for Women's Medical College? Because women in medicine struggled with acceptance in a man's medical world, Ann Preston, women's medical dean, won a right to expand clinical training for her female students. When the women attended lectures in the surgical amphitheater, they were greeted with catcalls and assaulted with spitballs, and tobacco juice by the male medical students. Well, something happened. There's no doubt about that. How many people it happened to and the details? See what we can find out, because this story grew to be part of the legend of the history of women's medical from its early struggling years. And I realize now, as I'm writing this script, I probably should have done the podcast about the founding of the Female Medical College of Pennsylvania in 1850 before I did this one. But I'm going to skip those 15 or 20 early formative years because I want to address that one incident when Anna Lukens, Anna Broomall, and others came face to face with the apparent over-the-top hostile reaction from male medical students in their own environment. Now, a little bit of background information before I start. Laurel Hill East permanent resident Sarah Josepha Hale. I talked about her way back in All Bones Considered number 4, Holidays Among the Stones. Sarah Josepha Hale had been campaigning since shortly after the school opened to eradicate the adjective female. She was a huge fan of the school, but she considered the word female, quote, vulgar, ungrammatical, and discordant with the Bible, Shakespeare, and all of Anglo-Saxon usage, end quote. Hale started her crusade with a screed against Vassar Female College. She totally supported the school, but she was offended by that name. And in 1866, Vassar dropped female from its name. The next year, the Female Medical College of Pennsylvania became Women's Medical College. Although Philadelphia's Thomas Jefferson University has the non-honor of being the last medical school to accept women, Women's Medical was the last medical school to accept members of the opposite sex. They only did that when they changed to the Medical College of Pennsylvania, or MCP. Thankfully, Dr. Stephen J. Peitzman covered the pertinent 1869 incident in his 2000 book, A New and Untried Course, Women's Medical College and Medical College of Pennsylvania, 1850-1998. What I'm going to read to you now is a section taken from Chapter 2, The chapter title is Building Within, Opposition Without. This is from the subchapter entitled Blackguardism at the Nation's First Hospital. I put some of my own comments in here also, and I put some other items in from an online article I found. I'll tell you about after I read this part of the script. Are you ready? Here we go. While engaged in the medical society battles, the increasingly self-assured Philadelphia medical women saw the time is ripe to apply for entry into a majestic home of high-caste Philadelphia medicine, the Pennsylvania Hospital. Opened in 1752, mainly to serve the poor, this first general hospital in the United States became a center of clinical education. It offered lecture demonstrations, clinics, attended by male medical students from all the city's medical schools. These clinical lectures, at which selected patients were presented and discussed and even operated on, were taught by renowned faculty members of the University of Pennsylvania and Jefferson Medical College, who also held prestigious staff positions at Pennsylvania Hospital. In September of 1869, the Quaker managers, the trustees of Pennsylvania Hospital, gave permission to their friends, the Quakers on the WMC board, for the college students to attend the hospital's clinical lectures. You pay your $2 for a ticket, you walk in like anybody else to see the lecture. And on the 6th of November, 1869, about 30 to 35 WMC students excitedly presented the tickets they had purchased from the hospital steward to take their seats in the new octagonal amphitheater. Dean Preston and her students were immediately reminded of their second-class citizen status when the clerk who took their tickets told them they would only be allowed to enter by way of the back stairs. Still, nothing was going to dim their enthusiasm. This determined dean and her 30-some students began to file into the octagonal surgical amphitheater, gingerly squeezing their long, puffy skirts through the tiered rows of seating that climbed the sides of the wall. The day before the lecture, one female student had gotten hold of an ominous slip of paper that was being circulated among the male medical students. It read, "Go tomorrow to the hospital to see the she-doctors." End quote. Clearly, the boys were planning some sort of mayhem for this historic occasion, and what awaited the women students might have been worse than anything they could have imagined. Accounts vary. What does not vary is that what happened shocked the women, and when broadcast in the Philadelphia newspapers and beyond, amazed and outraged the larger community. The Philadelphia Bulletin said that when the women first entered the amphitheater, several hundred male medical students greeted the newcomers with yells, hisses, caterwauling, mock applause, offensive remarks upon personal appearance, etc. Other newspaper accounts stated, however, that the room remained calm during much of the first hour of clinical presentation by Dr. Jacob Mendez da Costa, the namesake for da Costa syndrome, soldier's heart, first description of what we now call PTSD. The patients he presented, however, had malaria, sunstroke, and dropsy. Second part of the instruction, surgical cases demonstrated by Dr. William Hunt. His cases included an unfortunate man with a poorly healing fracture of the femur. The discussion of his situation required, according to some journalistic accounts, a momentary exposure of the thigh or the groin area. Now, despite this patient having been given a small blanket for modesty, there was a momentary exposure of his private parts. This was, quote, the signal for an explosion among the students. Mock applause, clamping, stamping, shouts of joy mingled with hisses, jeers, and a wild uproar. Now, this was all taken from a special telegraph to the New York Tribune. But other accounts fail to include this seeming nadir of a wretched affair. By the end of the clinic, Broomall said, She had scarcely heard a word of what our preceptor has been trying to tell us. All accounts agree that upon the conclusion of the Saturday clinic, the WMC students were harassed as they left the clinic hall through the Pennsylvania hospital grounds. Quote, after the lectures, the male students took possession of the walk leading through the yard from the hospital. This is probably near the unmarked grave of Mary Gerard. This compelled the objects of their audacity to take the carriageway to the street. Reaching the street, the students followed them some distance, greatly to their annoyance, even when they broke into small groups, uttering various uncouth noises, indecent comments, and making another manifestation peculiar to this class of gentlemen. Another account referred to the, quote, jeers, hisses, and other traits of rowdyism from the future MDs of the country. With few exceptions, the press condemned the male students and supported the reality and the idea of women doctors. One Philadelphia reporter mused cheekily, quote, why these sagacious youths object to female physicians we do not know, unless it is that they are conscious of intellectual deficiency and are afraid of competition from persons whom they feel to be their superiors mentally as they are morally, end quote. For weeks, articles, interviews, and editorials flowed through the pages of the Philadelphia Bulletin, the Ledger, the Post, other newspapers, a huge mass of words set in the minuscule type that was so popular back then. These words, in turn, multiplied along telegraph wires, so that the entire country read about the Philadelphia male students, quote, blackguardism. That's a favorite word at the time. Blackguard or blackguard simply meant a scoundrel. The New York World almost sounded impressed and maybe a little jealous that such a riot would occur in Philadelphia, quote, the dullest village in America. The women who attended documented the event in their notebooks, their scrapbooks, their diaries, and of course they recalled it later. Sarah Hibbard received her MD in 1870. She wrote of enduring 2 hours of, quote, the groans and hisses of as ungentlemanly a set of fellows as one would care to meet in order to try and learn. She continued, quote, the conduct of the male students needs no comments further than to say that their loss was our gain, for certainly they did lose, and certainly we did gain. If these poor fellows had sought to do us a lifelong favor, they could not have done it any more effectively than they did in their conduct toward us during those sessions. Elizabeth Keller, another 1870 MD recipient, remembered in 1906 how, quote, we entered in a body amidst jeers and groanings, whistling and stamping of feet by the men students, who had determined to make it so unpleasant for us that from choice we would not care to attend another. On leaving the hospital, we were actually stoned by those so-called gentlemen, end quote. I mentioned Anna Broomall earlier. She supposedly led the women out. She graduated in 1872. She did become a faculty member. In 1926, more than 55 years after the incident, she recollected for a newspaper writer that, quote, the male students rushed in pell-mell, stood up in the seats, hooted, called us names, threw spitballs, trying in vain to dislodge us. Then there are the minutes of the Board of Managers of Pennsylvania Hospital, Quaker gentlemen. And the minutes refer to, quote, a serious disturbance in which a number of the male students in attendance behaved in a very indecorous manner, end quote. Calm and decorum ruled the clinic the next Saturday because only a small fraction of the male students came. Eventually, the contention and the verbiage receded, and mixed clinical lectures resumed as a routine component of Philadelphia's medical life. What underlay this extraordinary event in which a mass of young men, indeed future doctors, violated the most sacrosanct Victorian standards for treating the opposite sex? Well, for one thing, coeducation of any sort within higher education met with overwhelming opposition in 19th century America. But surely more was at stake on Philadelphia's Pine Street in 1869. For any man with even a pretense of breeding to jeer, mock, perhaps even stone and spit upon women can hardly be imagined in mid-19th century America. And therein lies one piece of the explanation. By coming to the Pennsylvania hospital in order to look upon exposed skin and flesh in the presence of men, which true ladies would never do, the WMC students, in the judgment of the male students, had desexed themselves and abrogated their right to customary gender-based deference and respect. In a vicious letter published in the New Republic, R.W.M., a University of Pennsylvania student who was present on the 6th of November, with phrases fed by some black load of misogyny, assailed the, quote, shameless herd of sexless beings who dishonor the garb of the ladies, this beardless set of non-blushers. In his 19th century male worldview, these students, despite their long hair and dark dresses, were not in fact true women and needed not so to be treated. Consciously or not, this assumption must have unleashed the behavior of the men students. Although the men may have perceived the newcomers as desexed by their mere presence in the teaching center, the WMC contingent was still sufficiently female to represent an intolerable invasion of what had been an all-male temple, the privileged halls of Pennsylvania Hospital. The group from WMC chose to, quote, infest the rights of 400 regular medical students who have sustained the clinics from their foundation, wrote RWM, who also referred to our citadel in possession of this neuter 34. Well, for the 34 or 35 women who endured the jeers at the amphitheater, it was a true rite of passage. The event prefigured the countless smaller acts of insult and disapproval that women medical students would encounter for many decades to come. The notorious Pennsylvania Hospital incident became one of the defining stories of Women's Medical College, a very real and vicious event that grew into legend, into folklore. A graduate of 1889, in her biography, wrote, quote, this is only 20 years after the event, which means she might not have been born when it happened, but she said, quote, one of our most cherished traditions when I was a student there was the story of Dr. Ann Preston, the first dean of the college, leading a small group of women medical students in forced march down the middle of Chestnut Street, protected by the police from a mob of male medical students who had hooted them out of a clinic which the women had been given permission to attend. This alumna remembered not the event, but the institutional memory of the event as propagated forward in time. This is now a canonized part of the college's saga. It is tempting to believe that the oppressive events of 1869 helped instill in the women leaders of the college of those years, and for decades to come, a persistent sense that however attitudes might progress, caution prescribed the sustenance, at least in some one place, of a medical education environment reserved for women. The Pennsylvania Hospital jeering episode occurred in 1869. Women's Medical College would not admit their first male medical student until 1969, 100 years later. What I have read to you over the last several minutes is mostly the account of the 1869 event when women medical students tried to join the men for education. The source again, Dr. Stephen Peitzman's book, A New and Untried Course. Although I did find a few nugget details from the website Undark and a 2021 blog called Revisiting the Pennsylvania She-Doctor Panic of 1869 by Olivia Campbell. I hope if Dr. Peitzman and Miss Campbell ever listen to this, they approve of the way that I use their material. Because this portion of the podcast was really supposed to be about Anna Lukens, one of the 30-plus women who were involved in that episode. I need to get back to Anna Lukens now that I've told you that wonderful story. Anna was born in Plymouth Meeting, just outside of Philadelphia, to a family that belonged to the Society of Friends. Plymouth Meeting had been founded by Quakers in 1708. I find no connection between Anna's family and the Lukens branch, which had founded the steel company in Coatesville in 1818. Anna was the youngest of 9 children, born to Reuben and Catherine Wood Lukens, most of whom did not reach adulthood. It's possible that Anna was led to medicine after watching her 13-year-old sister Catherine die when Anna was 5. Her 24-year-old sister died in 1855 when Anna was 10. Her brother James died at age 23 when Anna was 12. And the 2 siblings which immediately preceded her, Barclay and Emma, both died before Anna was born. They were 2 years old when they died. After she got her MD from WMC in 1870, Dr. Anna Lukens secured a position as an intern at the Women's Hospital of Philadelphia. The Women's Hospital of Philadelphia had been established in 1861 by a group of Quaker women, particularly Ann Preston, to provide clinical experience for WMC students. Its purposes were to, quote, establish in Philadelphia a hospital for the treatment of diseases of women and children and for obstetrical cases, furnishing at the same time facilities for clinical instruction to women engaged in the study of medicine and for the practical training of nurses. The chief resident physician to be a woman. Women's Hospital accepted its first patient to the lying-in department, in other words, labor and delivery, on 16 December 1861. By April 1862, 12 patients occupied beds. Women's Hospital grew steadily. By 1875, it housed 37 beds, treated nearly 2,000 patients at their homes. The home visits were mostly carried out by the women medical students, and they saw more than 3,000 visitors in their dispensary. Women and children who required admission were admitted without regard to their religious belief, nationality, or color. However, they generally did not accept pregnant women who were unwed. At least one woman staff physician pleaded for sympathizing care. She said it would do more to change a life to admit a pregnant, non-wed woman than the moralistic rejection that they were offering. In May of that year, Anna Lukens became the first woman member of a medical society in the United States. She was elected as a member of the Montgomery County Medical Society. The following year, she began to teach at the college as an instructor in the chair of physiology. In 1872, Anna taught pharmacy in the college by lectures and practical demonstrations in the dispensary of Women's Hospital. She was the first woman to apply for admission to the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy, but she was discouraged by the reception there. So she went north and she studied analytical chemistry in the laboratory of Dr. Walls at the College of Pharmacy in New York City. Dr. Lukens became an attending physician of the Western Dispensary for Women and Children in 1863. In some cases, she actually paid for the rent of this dispensary using her personal money. This was a Manhattan hospital that was incorporated in March 1869 at 218 9th Avenue. One of the founders was Abraham Jacobi. He's considered the father of pediatric medicine in the United States. Now, that same year, Dr. Anna Lukens was elected a member of the New York County Medical Society. 1877, Dr. Lukens was appointed assistant physician in the Nursery and Child's Hospital of Staten Island, which had opened in 1854 on St. Mark's Place. She was assuming the responsibility of the pharmaceutical department. She was appointed resident physician of the hospital in 1880. She was 35 years old. The Nursery and Child's Hospital merged with the New York Infant Asylum in 1910 to form the New York Nursery and Child's Hospital. That became part of the New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center in 1934, and that center is now known as the New York Presbyterian Hospital Weill Cornell Medical Center. I gave rounds there a couple of times. Dr. Lukens read 2 papers before the Staten Island Clinical Society, which were published in the New York Journal, copied in the London Lancet, and received favorable notice by British Medical Journal. In 1884, she went abroad to study children's diseases in the principal hospitals of Europe. She later opened an office for private practice in New York City, and then she was elected a Fellow of the New York State Medical Society. In America's centennial year, she was appointed as one of the vice presidents of the New York Committee for the Prevention and State Regulation of Vice. Dr. Lukens was an early member of the Sorosis Club and was considered a woman of marked executive ability for hospital administration. Sorosis, S-O-R-O-S-I-S, is a Latinate word meaning aggregation. It's from the Greek word soros, which means heap. Its primary objective was to further the educational and social activities of women by bringing representative women of accomplishment in art, literature, science, and other pursuits. What happened was in March of 1868, a group of women had tried to purchase tickets to the all-male New York Press Club hosted dinner for author Charles Dickens. It was going to be at Delmonico's. They were denied. So in response, they formed their own club. They started Sorosis. And the next month, April of 1868, they hosted their first lunch meeting also at Delmonico's, and they extended an invitation to Charles Dickens, but he declined. In the 1912 publication, The Part Taken by Women in American History, Anna Lukens' work was praised. Her work is of a high standard, and she occupied a conspicuous position for a woman in the profession which she has chosen. In addition to the articles that Dr. Lukens wrote for the New York Medical Journal, she wrote a book, The History of Nursery and Child's Hospital, New York. It was published in 1893. Dr. Anna Lukens had a farm in Pennsylvania, an apartment in New York City at 485 Central Park West, and a winter home called Sequoia Lodge by the Sea. That was in Pacific Grove, California. It was built in 1906 by California architect Emily Williams, one of the few women who practiced architecture in the early 20th century. Dr. Anna Lukens retired from clinical practice in 1902 when she was 58 years old. She shared her homes with her lifelong companion, Mary Conrad, about whom we know very little. Anna is interred in the Lukens family plot in Section I. Her grave marker is a typical Quaker, modest, melting marble marker. But the final, inescapable reminder of her status is found 7 July 1917, and notice in the Evening Public Ledger. Dateline, New York. Miss Anna Lukens, not doctor, who died on June 16th, bequeathed most of her estate to charity. She gave $5,000 each to the Pacific Grove Museum of Pacific Grove, California, the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, to the hospital of the same college, and to the American Institute of Scientific Research. As is so common when two women live together for such a period of time in a so-called Boston marriage, there's no mention made of Mary Conrad, and Dr. Anna Lukens' partner seems to be lost to history.